Welcome everybody to this vlog about gifted education in the arts classroom. And I'm here with Dr. Matt, and he knows how excited I am, and I'm having a really hard time holding it in how excited I am to have this
Oh,
conversation.
just let it out. Just let it out.
This is great because he's a wonderful person and a very smart person and very easy to talk to. And have a lot that we can cover, and we're going to try to stay on topic, but we're not going to try very hard to stay on
We're
topic.
not going to try very hard.
No. Yeah. Tell us a little
So-
bit about your background and what you have to do with gifted children.
So my name is Dr. Matt Zakreski. Everybody calls me Dr. Matt. And I describe myself as a grown-up gifted kid. I was that kid in school who was smart and quirky and drew cartoons and knew a lot about a lot of things. And it wasn't until I was given the opportunity to go to the Center for Talented Youth summer camp that everything aligned for me. And I realized that the person I was faking being, the person I was masking as in public school, was not who I truly was. It was this person who can have high-level conversations about the Franco-Prussian War while throwing a Frisbee. That's the person I am. And and really in that moment, right, so many pieces of my life flow from identifying as a gifted kid and and embracing that identity. So because of the Center for Talented Youth camp, I got introduced to the arts and doing improv, and which led to a lengthy, if not particularly illustrious, career in musical theater, and then back to improv and stand-up comedy. And then I went to grad school and became a psychologist. And halfway through grad school, I was like, what should I do? Who should I help? And I'm like, oh, right, gifted kids, because that's who I am and that's what I understand. And so, here I am, coming into year 6 postdoctorate with, the Dr. Matt as a person who helps gifted kids. And I love what I do. I often say this work is personal and professional for me. And, and as we understand more about neurodivergence and how to meet the needs of these kids, I think that, we're at a pivotal moment in history, because we are truly now understanding what kids need to succeed, especially if they're neurodivergent.
Yes. So we have lots to talk about, and I'm very excited, but let's start at the very, very basics.
Yeah.
What is a gifted student? How does a student come to be labeled as gifted? Let's get the one.
Yeah, it's a good question to start with. So, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. So traditionally speaking, on an IQ test, the gifted IQ starts at 130. So, that's 2 standard deviations away from the mean of 100. And is a simple metric, right? It's a good place to start. Giftedness can also be identified through other sorts of standardized testing, including state testing, basically the 98th percentile or higher. And that's how it shows up in the academic spheres.
Okay.
In non-academic spheres, things like art, leadership, music, athletics, dance, it's a little bit more subjective, right? The general thought process on this is about the top 10% or so for your age range.
Okay.
Especially if you are competing or performing at a high level. So, it's not just enough that like I do ballet as a 10-year-old, it's I am doing competitive ballet with perhaps 11 and 12-year-olds. That points us more in the direction, right, of like, this is someone who may be gifted in the kinesthetic kind of intelligence that would lead to being a professional dancer.
Okay. I just thought about 30 questions.
Good. That's
okay.
This is gonna be the longest vlog ever.
I know. We're gonna try. Like I said, we're gonna try, but not very hard. Okay.
Not very hard.
So are people really giving kids IQ tests still? Is that still a thing?
It's very much a thing.
Okay. I thought IQ tests had gone out of vogue, but they're still a thing.
There's still a thing.
Tell me about IQ tests.
And part of that is that they are we are aware that they are problematic in some
Okay.
way. So the gold standard in intelligence testing is still the Wechsler measures. So if you're familiar with this, it's the abbreviation for your 6 to 16-year-old is the WISC, the
Okay.
Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children.
Okay.
And if you're an adult, it's the WAIS, Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale. There's one for preschoolers as well, 2 to 5-year-olds, called the WIPSI, which is just fun to say, really. Yeah, it's very like whimsical.
Yes.
And the idea here is that what we have decided intelligence is
Okay.
can be measured and metriced. So as a standardized measure, your IQ score matters. It is a piece of information that matters. It matters much more in context. So if you have a 113 IQ, we know that as just a metric, that means you're about 13% smarter than we would expect someone your age to be.
Okay.
Right? That's what that means. Broadly speaking, though, it puts us in percentile ranks to how you would compare to other people your age.
Okay.
So, this 98th percentile piece, which is where 130 starts, that can tell me that you walk through the door and you're as smart or smarter than 98% of the people your age.
Okay.
Which tells me that you have literally a different brain, right? Your brain is different enough at that point to be quantifiably and qualitatively different than a neurotypical person.
Okay. Okay. This is good basics. So
Yeah,
what's the difference? Is there a difference? There's a couple of different terms that we would use in, more the music world of, like a savant. Is that a term that's like in there? We don't like that term. We feel, you kind of made a face when I said savant.
Well, because it's an interesting term. It's a complicated term.
Yes.
Savantism is a subset of the broader gifted community.
Okay.
So you have gifted, exceptionally gifted, profoundly gifted, right? Every 15 points of an IQ score, we pop down into we're in the nether regions, right? And savantism is really interesting because it takes a lot of the aspects of giftedness and it takes one piece of information and pulls it so high up that everything else sort of gets dragged with it. So it's like the BMI scale, body mass index.
Yes, body mass index. Yeah.
Right. So if you were 6'10", almost regardless of how much you weigh, you're going to be obese by the BMI.
Right.
Because just bones and muscle weigh a lot,
Yes.
and if you're 6'10" worth of them,
Yeah.
right? So it's one of those things like a very high score in one thing essentially breaks the scale, right? The scale is meant to see things in context,
Right.
and a significant outlier sort of like blows it up.
Right.
So savantism, right, is being so good, so developed at a thing that everything else tends to be underdeveloped, and a person can be almost myopic about the thing they're savantish about.
Okay.
So
okay. Then there's another word, which is prodigy.
Prodigy, yes.
Tell me about the word prodigy, because that's probably the favorite word that we love in the music world.
I mean, isn't it a great word? Prodigy as a term is really interesting, right? I've worked with a couple of musical prodigies.
Yeah.
So the idea here is that someone who is a prodigy, has, exceptional qualities or abilities that show up young. So when we use the word prodigy, we're almost always talking about somebody who's like 10 or younger.
Okay.
And
a child prodigy.
A child prodigy. It's sort of it's almost a redundant term, right?
Yes.
Because it's sort of baked in. The young man I'm thinking about was the second chair of violin in a major orchestra here on the East Coast, not for the youth orchestra, for the city orchestra, second chair.
Yeah.
And he was 8 years old. This is like that is a prodigy right there.
Yeah.
I mean, this kid understood music like LeBron James understands basketball, like Michael Phelps understands swimming, like like I understand foosball, you know. I mean, it's like we are put on earth to do certain things, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Um, and it was a fascinating thing because, you know, talent always talks, like talent shows up.
Right.
And so he would walk into auditions and people would say, "Hey, you know, it's like, who brought the child to work day," right?
Yeah.
And then he would whip out his violin and blow something out of the water, and people would
Right.
be,
Right.
and you know, and this is where, you know, this is where neurodivergence is such a complicated beast, right? Because when you are a prodigy or a gifted kid or a savant, wherever you fall on that neurodivergent spectrum, you're going to develop asynchronously. Now, this is a really important word for the communities we share, right?
Okay.
So a neurotypical person who's 10 years old
Mhm.
is more or less chronologically 10, intellectually 10,
Mhm.
emotionally 10,
Mhm.
socially 10, and
Mhm.
has the skill set of a 10-year-old,
Right.
broadly speaking. One of the things we know about gifted kids and savants and twice exceptional kids is that so much energy in neurodevelopment goes to your parietal frontal integration area, which is about right here. This is
Mhm.
where intelligence sits in your brain.
Okay.
Um, so much energy goes to that other things tend to lag behind.
Okay.
So a neurodiverse person who's chronologically 10 might be intellectually 15,
Mhm.
socially 8,
Mhm.
emotionally 7, and have the physical skills of an 11-year-old.
Interesting.
That's much more common,
Okay.
right? And this is why gifted kids, I often joke that they do what I reverse school. So like growing up, I was like, and I was a gifted kid, but I was like, math, English, I like English, you
Mm.
know, but like art class, yeah, music class, yeah, recess, yeah, right?
Yes.
And a lot of the kids I work with are like math class, yeah, science class, yeah, recess. Oh, I
Yeah.
don't wanna.
I don't want to
And
be
they're
there.
harder, right? They don't fit that. Their schools are built for neurotypical synchronous kids.
Right. Okay.
Neurodivergent kids who are by definition asynchronous are you know are are more likely to struggle in the less structured classes.
Hmm.
And when you're used to being at the top of the charts and having those abilities manifest at this very high level,
Right.
you know, how do you tell a kid who can play second chair level violin that he needs to practice his basic math facts?
Right.
Right. There's a huge gap between those skills.
Yeah.
And in my line of work as a psychologist, when I see those kind of gaps, I see tension, and tension means anxiety, and
Mhm.
anxiety means problematic behaviors. So that's where I think sort of, you know, psycho developmentally, that's where we're at here.
Okay. Yeah. I have absolutely seen that happen. There was a summer program that I was in as a student, but also was a counselor for several years. And it was an orchestra program. And every year there would be, I mean, everyone who was in that program, because it was very competitive, was very musically gifted. But then there would always be a handful out of the 115 of us or so who were prodigies, who were
Yeah.
particularly profoundly gifted in music. And I remember in particular one violin student who was concert mistress a couple years in a row when she was 13 and 14 years old and competing against 17 and 18-year-olds, but she was, first chair by a long shot. Her her social skills created some really awkward situations, some inappropriate behaviors that were just really surprising when if you close your eyes and listen to her play, you think you're listening to, a grad student or something like that. And but when watched her interact with her friends, she struggled massively, um, and tried to pretend that she wasn't, but she was
Yeah.
struggling. So we see that a lot in the music world, especially, when you have a student who plays like they're 20, but looks like they're 12, and you're putting them in a room with 15-year-olds.
Yep.
And you go, okay,
Yeah.
music.
Just
And see what happens. And it's something that when you're dealing with musically talented students, it's something that I still don't know what I'm supposed to do with those kids. Am I supposed to keep them with the kids that they can keep up with socially? Or am I supposed to keep them with the kids who can challenge them more musically, but they can't relate with because they haven't gone through puberty yet and everybody else has? What are we supposed to do? What can we do? Where are they supposed to fit? And how do we deal with them not fitting in anywhere? How can we help them? That was 18 really difficult questions.
Right. I mean, yeah, like let's get to just the core concept of like all of this, right?
Right.
And like anything else, there's not an easy answer. You know, every kid is different, every situation is different.
Of course.
You know, music as a general rule is one of the easier areas to accelerate in. Now, from an the intersection of psychology and education, right? Acceleration is moving kids to the level that they need to be taught at, not the level that the system says they should be taught at.
Okay.
I often say if a second grader has mastered multiplication and division, it is a waste of everybody's time to teach them addition. Right. Because that's what we teach second graders. So addition. Johnny has 17 pennies. Frank has 4 pennies. How many pennies do they have together? And this kid's like, let's see, 944 times 116 equals, and you're like, wait, we need to go where this kid is.
Right? Yeah.
And so musically, the old line is like, you never want to be the best musician in your band, right? So we just move them down the line. Right. Okay, middle school band. Okay, we're a high school band. You know, it is not uncommon for me to make a recommendation, if I'm working with a middle schooler, to say to the high school, hey, do you have a place in your marching band? Do you have a place in your orchestra for kid X to come and play music? Because we need something that is musically more challenging for this child. And 99% of the time, the school districts say yes, right? That's an area that's relatively easy to do. And it brings with it social challenges, right? I mean, there was a kid I worked with, this was several years ago, who was an 8th grader, was welcomed into the high school band. They did marching band. The marching band kids had a party. The party got broken up by the cops. And I get a call that my 13-year-old client is in lockup because there was alcohol at the party. And
nightmare.
And, and Allison, I don't want to speak for you, but many young, bright kids are super rule focused and guilt ridden. So
stop. Don't look at me.
My poor guy, he's like, I'm a bad person. I'm like, you didn't know, you went to a party. That is what kids do. You going to the party was not the problem, right? That's, let's be very clear there. And every single kid in the marching band said, this 13-year-old didn't do anything wrong. We were the ones who made the mistakes. They were just there. We welcomed them in. Like, honestly, they were playing Mario Kart when the cops came, right? And, so nothing ended up happening, but there is a risk that comes with this. Now, the happy ending to this story is that, when this kid went to high school the next year, they already had a built-in group of friends, right? They walked through as a freshman
of him.
Right? You know?
So I've seen that too, where the older kids will take the prodigy under their wing and say, this is our little brother and you're not going to mess with him. And they will kind of form like a community around this kid, but then they also have to deal with the older kids will have to deal with these feelings of, okay, I'm a senior. This is my last chance to get, first chair or whatever, the solo spot, or get into the large ensemble. And I know I'm not going to get first place because of this 13-year-old.
Right.
And it's messy. It's tricky. And when you have students who, for better or for worse, don't fit the mold, it breaks the mold.
Right. And the system is very good at kids who fit the mold, and not so good at kids who don't. So a lot of times, when I go to these meetings and I'm advocating for creative solutions to these problems, people will stare at me blankly and they'll say like, we're not built to do that.
Mhm.
And I always say back, you actually are, you're just not used to it.
Mm-hmm.
There is no reason why Johnny can't go, if Johnny's in third grade and doing high level music, right?
Yeah.
There's no reason Johnny can't walk down the hall and do music with other kids. Literally no reason.
Yeah.
Yes, there's some logistical problems if Johnny has to go to a different building or go across town, sure, right?
Yeah.
But if it's in the same building, there's no reason Johnny can't do math with the fifth graders or ELA with the sixth graders or music with the eighth graders.
Yeah.
We just need to open our minds to how much power to be flexible we have.
Yes, it is possible. And sometimes we get bogged down with the schedules or the, logistics or whatever. Just do it.
Yeah, just do it. Right?
So going back to your initial kind of definition of what a gifted student is, I foresee that there's potential for there to be students who would be labeled gifted, prodigy, talented, all of these fancy terms, but because they are not given access to accelerated programs in, pick a thing, will never know that they were brilliant.
Right.
How can schools, how can teachers, let's just talk about teachers. Right. How can teachers help identify students as gifted, especially if they're not typically fit into what you would expect a gifted, talented student to look like, or their situation is incredibly difficult at home and you don't know what's going to happen if you call home and say, I think your kid's genius. And so how can we better identify so that there's access to gifted and talented services and supports to more students? What should teachers be looking for?
Oh, and I have a lot of amazing colleagues who are doing work in this area. And I would be remiss if I didn't shout them out. So Dr. Donna Ford, Dr. Christina Collins, we get to stand on the shoulders of giants, and I get to be Facebook friends with these giants, and it blows my mind every single day. Obviously there are more. Colin Seal and Denise Garcia, and certainly so many. But the idea here is we need to break the idea of what we think a gifted kid is.
Yeah.
Right. One of the exercises I do when I do my sort of giftedness 101 talk, which by the way, if you contact me, I would be happy to come to your school and do. But we do an exercise. It's like when you think of gifted kids, when you think of the word gifted, what words come to mind? And inevitably people say Einstein, Newton, Edison, Tesla, right? Generally speaking, old white men. Right?
Yep.
And then I show a different slide that has Michael Jordan, Nicki Minaj, and Bobby Flay on it. And people always chuckle. And I'm like, but you cannot say that those people aren't gifted.
Yeah.
Right?
Tell me they're not. Tell me they're not.
Right. Who's to say Bobby Flay isn't brilliant at what he does? Right? Does that show in an academic setting? No, he actually very famously struggled with school. He has dyslexia. He has ADHD. He's very much a twice exceptional person.
Yeah.
Right. Which is why, and you're going to hear me come back to this a million times, it's why we need to think outside the box for these kids.
Yeah.
Right. Bobby Flay wouldn't have finished high school if a teacher hadn't said, hey, we can give you a work to graduate program. You're going to work at this restaurant. He did that. He fell in love with it. Now he's a Michelin starred chef. Right, with like 84 shows on the Food Network, right? I watch all of them. So we break the idea of what giftedness should look like, right? It's not Einstein, Newton, it's not Sheldon Cooper from Big Bang Theory. It's kids with sparks. It's kids that are quirky or challenging or weird. one of my colleagues, she works down in the Piscataway area. She calls these kids capes, because they're kind of like superheroes, right? But at school, like they have to hide, they have to put on their
Ah,
secret identities, right? And then she always pauses and she goes, and also gifted kids are the kind of kids who tend to wear capes to school. And I'm like,
okay,
yes, those are
yeah,
my people, right? When I
yes.
walk into any school, I'm like, the kids with the multicolored hair, the
Mhm.
kids with the macrame Pokemon backpack, the kids who are wearing capes.
Yep.
Y'all are my people. Like,
Yes.
oh, like come here, like come to me, my children, right? Um, so the weird, quirky piece, right, is another one. Um, the other thing of this, and this is one of my favorite examples, there's a thing we call the gifted C.
Okay.
And the idea with this is that really bright kids, generally speaking, don't do their homework and they don't do a lot of class participation.
Mm,
So the teachers get really frustrated with them and they say, like, "Oh, Sally." And
yeah.
then Sally shows up on test day and gets 100 on the test because Sally's been paying attention
Yeah.
while also doodling and playing with a fidget and creating an elaborate board game involving paper clips and an old gum wrapper,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So when I say when I go to schools, I say, like, yes, you're straight A kids. Sure, they may be gifted kids, right?
Yeah.
I am more interested in finding the kids who are frustrating, the kids who are like, if they would only work to their potential. And I
Yeah.
was like, there's a kid you say that about. I want to talk to that kid.
Yeah.
And inevitably, there's a teacher or two who says, oh, I've got a kid. That's what I want to know,
Yeah.
what their brains look like, because increasingly schools support and reward compliance. The kids who sit there and they
Wait, I
hold
need
their
you to I need you to say it again.
all
Say it
right.
louder
Is
for people in the back.
right. Is this going to be our bumper? Like next week
Yes.
on the Critical Good vlog, right?
My whole my whole thing is creating a culture of connection, not control or compliance.
Right.
But say it again. Just say
Yeah.
like I want to like hold your face while you say it.
Like, yeah.
Go ahead.
Schools are built to reinforce and reward compliance.
Yes.
You
Okay.
know,
Keep going.
and people who are asynchronous and neurodivergent and who are naturally outside of the box thinkers are less likely to play by those rules or do well in those environments.
Mhm.
And I was a very well-behaved kid. I sat there, I kept my eyes on the teacher while also doodling madly in my notebook until someone said, we know you're paying attention. You can doodle in your notebook. You don't have to pay attention anymore as long as your grades don't slip. And I was like, well, that's fine, done, easy.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what I did.
Yeah.
But this is the point of the conversation where I check my privilege as a cisgender heterosexual white male from an affluent town who has a doctorate, who has
Yes.
parents who have doctorates, right?
Mhm.
So if you are listening to this and you are a teacher in a less funded district, in a district that's more multicultural, and a district that doesn't necessarily have the history of meeting the needs of these kids, first off, there's a lot of help out there, and you can contact either one of us to get more resources. The second piece of this is these kids exist everywhere.
Yeah.
There are gifted kids in every school, every classroom, every discipline.
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't know it. Sometimes they don't know it. I can't tell you how many times when I explain to a kid what giftedness is, they go, that's what I am. I thought it was about getting straight A's. I'm like, most gifted kids don't get straight A's.
Yeah.
I certainly wasn't one of them. In the things I liked to do, sure, I was going to get really good marks in that. In the things that I had no interest in, I mean, I was gritting my teeth to get a B-, and then cue the chorus of "You need to work to your potential."
Yes.
You cannot make me care about economics. You can't. I won't do it. I will just sit there and I will plant my feet and I will say no.
And you know what? Is your life any better or any worse because you didn't grit your teeth and get better grades at economics?
Literally not at all.
Nope.
So
and do you remember a damn thing from your economics class?
The only thing I remember is supply and demand.
Supply and demand is a thing. Great.
It's a thing, right?
Done.
And and ask
Not,
me no more
not
questions
to
about
say,
it.
not to say that economics isn't important, but
Right.
like not everyone has to be thoroughly gobsmacked about every subject.
Right. And let the kids who are gobsmacked by it
Yeah.
be gobsmacked and do that, right?
Yes.
You know, school, the American education system has this really puritanical vibe to it of like, you must do
What?
all the
America is puritanical? Tell me more.
things. I am shocked by this revelation. We are breaking walls down.
Yes.
And increasingly, what the research shows us, if we lead with interest, if we take what the kids want to do, how they want to learn, what they want to talk about, they feel better, do better, act better, get better grades. And here's the vital thing. They contribute more to the school community. Kids who are happier learn better, they're better citizens.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've seen this in the schools that are doing this right, where it's like, let's use music for an example, right? Like, instead of making everybody have a recorder and play hot cross buns, which is done in every school in this great nation of ours, right? This music teacher I watched, she said, okay, guys, I want you to pick your favorite song, whether it's from YouTube, TikTok, your parents' MP3 collection, whatever, and then tell me what that song is, and then pick an instrument, and I'm going to teach you the best version of the part of that song that you can play on that instrument. So I watched her, and I mean, this is a legitimate thing. There was a kid who wanted to play the glockenspiel,
of course,
right?
Nice
and wanted to play glockenspiel to Whatever It Takes from Imagine Dragons.
Okay.
And it worked better than it had any right to. And I thought to myself, I said, this is a teacher who gets it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Music is a personal thing. We make personal connections with music.
Yes.
And if we allow kids to open their own doors towards that process,
yeah,
you just created a whole classroom of kids who love music because they engaged in it in the ways that felt best to them. Yay! Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It seems so obvious, and yet when you get down but it also seems very overwhelming, because when you are taught how to be a music teacher, you're taught how to teach one kind of music one kind of way, and you're taught how to do it really well, and then you get in front of kids and they don't care.
Nope.
They just don't care. And then you go, why don't you care? And they go, because I don't care. And there's some kids who are going to eat it up like, you're just going to slurp it up and say, oh my God, I love this. Can you give me more Baroque music, please? But most of them are going to be like, yeah, that has absolutely nothing to do with me.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So you mentioned twice exceptional. Tell us what twice exceptional students, what that means. And then also, does this mean that a student who is gifted, you could see it on their IEP or in some part of their paperwork?
You totally can. So twice exceptional is someone who has a gifted level IQ and has a documented learning difference.
Okay.
So exceptionalities would include ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, OCD, dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia. And then we can either take that to another level and bring in a little intersectionality and talk about 3E or thrice exceptionality. This is when we take a meaningful identity and put this through the lens of neurodiversity. So we cannot teach a young Black student who's twice exceptional the same way we teach a young white student.
Yeah.
And this is vital for unlocking that relationship, right? That piece of, we need to understand people in a meaningful context.
Yes.
Right. And so, and this is something that gifted education has traditionally struggled with. It's, if you look traditionally in gifted kid classrooms, a lot of kids who look like me, a lot of,
gotta put on your shades, white right in there.
Right. I'm exceptional because everyone told me I was.
Yes.
But even now, I will be in meetings and well-meaning, intelligent people will say, wait, a kid can't be gifted and ADHD. And I'm like, they totally can. And here's how that works.
Yeah.
And this is how we understand neurodivergence, right? This is why giftedness has a seat at that table,
Yeah.
because it really is brain differences.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So what should arts teachers know about teaching gifted children?
So gifted kids tend to struggle um, with a lot of the things that you would expect and some things you wouldn't.
Okay.
So we go back to that asynchrony model, right, from before. One of the things that tend to come online later with gifted kids is fine motor skills.
Okay.
What you need to play music, fine motor skills, right? So another thing gifted kids tend to struggle with is frustration tolerance.
Oh, great.
And frustration tolerance is cousin resiliency.
Mhm.
So think about it this way: if you've never struggled at anything before and now you struggle, you don't really have the mechanisms
Mhm.
to recover from that as well.
Yeah.
You know, school once again is built for neurotypical kids, and the idea is that the meaningful challenges step up gradually every year, which is how many neurotypical people learn.
Yeah.
Challenge level A, challenge level B, challenge level C. But if you start at challenge level D and everybody's teaching you at A, what ends up happening is our brains are lazy. Our brains learn how to coast.
Yeah.
So then all of a sudden school becomes harder than you are smart, and
Mm.
you don't know how to downshift and work harder. I can't tell you the kids I work with who like, I don't know how to study. I don't know how to practice my instrument. And parents will roll their eyes at that, but I was like, no. Genuinely speaking, I never read a book in school until high school. It was sophomore year in Miss Brady's English class where I had to read The Great Gatsby.
Oh,
The Great
God.
Gatsby. And you know, amazing. I would speed read, but it was the first time I had to read for content.
Yeah.
And I literally went to her and said, I don't know how to do this. And she's like, Matt, you're a bright student. Blah, 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 blah. I'm like, yeah. No, I know. I'm really smart. That's great. How do I do what you need me to do?
Yeah.
And it took a lot of courage to ask that question, right? I mean, I was embarrassed that I didn't know how to read the way she needed me to read.
Right.
But what I found is that reading it the way I always had before, speed reading for going for like the shotgun effect, I vaguely know what's going on, got me a 62 on her test. So I had to change what I was doing.
Yeah.
And if perhaps I had been exposed to that kind of instruction earlier,
Yeah.
something that was more aligned to my level, I would have developed those skills earlier when I was more malleable.
Right.
This is the fundamental, this is why gifted education and acceleration are not just best practices,
Mhm.
they are vital for the development of the people we're talking about.
Right.
The sooner we get kids in situations where they're meaningfully and appropriately challenged, they develop the grit, resilience, the frustration tolerance we need them to. But if you're a music teacher or an arts teacher and you get kids who are constantly, you know, draw this bowl of fruit and they're freaking out, they're screaming, they're melting down, it's not because they're bad kids. It's not because they can't handle it.
Yeah.
It's because the vision they have in their head cannot be transmitted to the paper right now. Whether that's a fine motor delay, a psychosocial delay, we're not sure.
Yeah.
Right. So what we need to do is we need to meet them where they are. What's appropriate scaffolding to get you from A to B to C to D?
Yeah.
And if we make space for the emotionality in the room, right? Because emotions are behavior and behavior is communication.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, my guess is this is really hard for you. And my guess is that not a lot of things have been hard for you. And we will push back on our puritanical nature saying, ha, now you know how the rest of us feel.
Yes,
right?
Us mere mortals.
Yes. I'm going to look down my nose at you.
Yes, I can now. You think you're better than me. Guess
right?
not.
You would not believe how many times I hear that.
Yeah.
You know, it's a well-worn metaphor, but it's a good one. Ask a kid, if you play video games, if I just dropped you at the boss fight, could you win? I guess I know. Of course I could. I don't have the sword. I haven't leveled up. I don't know any magic, right? Right. You have to play the game. You need to grind. You need to get your XP.
Yeah.
right? And then you look up and you've beat Breath of the Wild, and it's something you didn't think you could do until you had done it.
Mm-hmm.
And school is the same way. The trick with school's not as intrinsically motivating as video games are, or basketball or soccer, whatever the kid does best, right?
Yeah.
So you say, but just like a video game, we're starting at level 1 here. Now I know you want to be at level 10. I know you want to fight the final boss.
Yeah.
Let me help you grind some XP on this. Let me help you intentionally learn the stuff you need.
Mm-hmm.
Because then you'll be amazed at how quickly these kids level up.
Yeah.
You know, right? Like, but that's the thing, it's intentional, specific education.
Yeah.
To get the kids over what they're being challenged with right now.
Yeah. Without judgment.
Without judgment, for sure.
Yes. So, well, let's do our little fun questions at the end.
Let's do it.
Okay. I'm going to surprise you with a would you rather question.
Ooh, okay.
Would you rather, just expecting that they're both equally safe options, would you rather explore the ocean floor
Okay.
or explore outer space?
Outer space.
Tell me why.
Because I wanted to be an astronaut since I was about 2.
Okay.
And it's one of the things, like, I have scuba dived, I have snorkeled, I have surfed, I
Old
grew up
hat.
on the beach, so I've spent I've spent more time in the ocean than I have in outer space, because my outer space time is currently 0, unless Jeff Bezos returns one of my calls. I can jump on Blue
I'm going to
Orca.
say unlikely.
Yeah, probably not, right? I don't have those amount of commas in my bank account. So, but Jeff, if you're listening, right? I mean,
If you're listening, I have a lot of questions.
Right. So many questions. But I mean, just the idea of being in outer space, I mean, it's romantic, it's scientific, it's I mean, life altering. So totally outer space.
Okay. So the last question is, what is the best advice you've ever received? Please share it.
The best advice I've ever received. So the best advice I've ever received, and this requires just a small bit of context.
Okay. We have time for
so when I was a senior in college, I went to Wake Forest University. I was able to take Dr. Maya Angelou's poetry class. That's always a face people make when I tell that story. It's great.
Okay.
And
wait, is this advice from Maya Angelou?
This is advice from Maya Angelou that I am parroting. Okay. So
great.
So you have to understand, like, Maya Angelou doesn't teach on campus. We drove to her house, right?
Yeah, you do whatever.
So, yeah, whatever you say, Dr. Angelou. So we're sitting around in her parlor, and she's explaining what the poetry class is going to look like, and she's asking us to introduce ourselves. And it gets to me, and I'm like, I'm Matt Zakreski, I'm from New Jersey, and then I blurt out, I don't belong here. And because I'm a pretty good writer. I'm no poet. And so then she sort of looked at me and she sort of sized me up, and she said, okay, Matt, so let's talk about this for a minute. She said, you're in this class, you have to apply to get this class. So one of 2 things happened. 1, you fooled me. You fooled me with your writing sample to think you're a better writer than you are, or I know a lot more about this than you do, and I see talent in you that you don't see in yourself. And I have been speechless in my life 6 times, Allison, and that was one of them.
Yeah.
Like, I felt both about 2 inches tall and also totally seen at the same time, right? So my advice to you and anyone who happens to be listening is that if somebody believes in you, let them.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, well, I can't compete with that advice. That's the best thing. That's incredible.
It's very good advice. It's very good advice.
Let them believe in you.
Yes.
I'm gonna just marinate in that for the rest of the day.
Okay.
So, thank you times a million to Dr. Matt for a very thrilling hour, and I learned a lot. I hope that anyone who's watching learned something from this. I know I certainly did, and I hope that more teachers can keep an eye out for gifted students, gifted in any of the many myriad different ways that students can be gifted, and that you come to them with a little bit more patience and a little bit more imagination, and bring your students to the next level, whatever that looks like for them.
Whatever it does.
Yeah.